So, this is the guide to the spell counter archetype of Endymion and the Mythical Beasts. This is a very pure version of this deck. So to get started, I'll briefly discuss how each archetype functions separately, before I talk about them working together. I assume you know the effects of the cards in the Endymion archetype, but to give a quick summary, Servant, Magister, and Reflection has a pendulum effect to remove 3 spell counters from themselves, to special summon themselves and one monster you can place a spell counter on from your hand if you're Reflection, from the extra deck if you're Magister, and from the deck if you're Servant. Then they can place a spell counter on them and the summon target. The archetype is essentially Endymion Turbo, and each card is meant to protect him and help him maintain board presence. Magister cheats him from the extra deck as a pendulum monster, but then he cheats him out of the deck as a monster. Servant cheats him from the deck as a pendulum and can grant him a spell counter if he doesn't already have one. Reflection can cheat him from the hand and bounce whatever he can't beat over. Mythical Beast is pretty straightforward. They have effects for when they are the only card in the pendulum zones. They all have a skill of 4, and when they are the only card in the zone, they can blow themselves up to activate effects. On the field, they all have varying effects, but they all share the effect that they all gain a spell counter when a spell is activated, except for Master Cerberus and Jackal King, who gets 2 per spell activation. Similar to Endymion, the Mythical Beast is essentially Jackal King and Cerberus Turbo. Be mindful that none of the Mythical Beasts can accrue spell counters in the pendulum zone, but can accrue them easily once they hit the field. And Endymions can accrue them easily in the pendulum zone, but not as easily once they hit the field. Mythical Beast gains spell counters on field on spell activations, but Magister gains a spell counter only when he attacks, Servant has to discard, and Reflection has no way of gaining any herself once you use her special summon effect. This is mostly because the Endymion Brigade are great bounce targets for Endymion's negate. Now, here is a screenshot of my deck. I will go over each card. To start, I have Jackal in here for another way to get out Jackal King. His monster effect allows you to remove 3 spell counters from the field to tribute himself to bring out another Mythical Beast monster, which is most likely Jackal King, but another good target is Master Cerberus. Since he tributes himself, you want to use this effect before he gets 4 or more spell counters because they'll be wasted. His pendulum effect is essentially like a spell power grasp. It pops itself and puts a spell counter on a card you control. Now, people have mixed feelings about Magister. His pendulum effect isn't the absolute best, but if you've seen my compilations, you know I do use it. And I use his monster effect quite a bit. His monster effect is he removes 3 spell counters from your field to special summon a card that you can place a spell counter on from your deck. Which means during your opponent's turn, your targets are most likely Reflection, Jackal King, and Endymion, which means that he can either bring out another negate, or he can bounce something that is already on the field, and he is also a scale 8, which is really good. Servant is a staple, which is why she's a secret rare. Not much to really say about her. She allows you to turbo out Endymion or Jackal King, which is pretty neat. And then her monster effect, you can use it to discard a card to add a spell counter on every card you control. You won't use it much. I use it rarely. But remember that if you do discard a Spellcaster monster, it can be special summoned later by Selene. It can also be used if your Endymion was summoned by someone like Magister, and you want to get a spell counter on Endymion so you don't have to use his negate on something like Lightning Storm or like Dark Hole or something. She also serves as a prime target to bounce to your hand for Reflection or Endymion, as you can put her back in the pendulum zone. And also, her and Magister do have the effect where if they're destroyed, you can choose to put them back in the pendulum zone, having the same amount of spell counters as they used to have. Magical Abductor is your Rhoda, similar to Mythical Institution, except Abductor is more easily searched, which is why I run 2 and not 3. In the Pendulum Zone, she removes 3 spell counters to search a Pendulum monster. This is not spell counter based, so some of these 1-ofs you see in my deck can be searched by her. Her monster effect is a minor attack boost, and its only target in the deck is Jackal, so you probably won't be using it. Be mindful, it will be hard to get her out of the pendulum zone once you get her there. Thankfully, her skill is 3, so it's not bad. Alright, Garuda serves as a hand trap and as a MST. His pendulum effect is he can pop himself to pop 1 spell and trap card on the field, which is really neat because it does get you over certain floodgates, such as skill drain or goes in match, which I've fought both times against Eldlich. His monster effect is when your opponent normal or special summons a monster, you can remove 3 spell counters from your field, special summon this card, then return that monster to the opponent's hand. So it's a pretty good balance, especially if you wait until it is an extra deck monster. Like I said before, it does serve as an out to things like skill drain. Be mindful that he is not that great on the field, and his reactive nature means he is dead until your opponent takes their first turn. Still an amazing card, and you should try to consistently have this guy in your hand. Reflection of Endymion is a pretty decent card. Her pendulum effect feels subpar compared to Magister and Servant. It's easier to view as you are using her pendulum effect to use her monster effect. I have yet to use her pendulum effect though. Her monster effect is where she shines though. Unlike Garuda, who has to be in the hand at the time of the summon, Reflection can bounce just whenever you special summon her, and the fact she bounces one of your cards with her spell counter as well as getting the spell counters it had is great since you can reuse the cards you bounce. Like Garuda, she can bounce obstacles out of the way, but what's special about her than Garuda is the fact that she can bounce anything. She can bounce monsters, spells, or traps from your opponent's field, which is actually pretty good and pretty versatile. Now, similar to Garuda, Reflection is kind of a sitting duck when she hits the field. She has a pretty low attack at 1850. She does have a pretty decent defense, but other than that, she kind of just sits there. Now her last effect is, when this card with a spell counter is destroyed by battle, you can add 1 Endymion card from your deck to your hand. I rarely ever see this come into play, but it is there. Jackal King is your other Endymion. You turbo this guy out as well, especially before your 5th summon since he negates Nibiru. His pendulum effect is he blows himself up to special summon 1 face-up Mythical Beast monster from your extra deck, which your target is usually Cerberus, but it can also be Jackal, to then use Jackal's monster effect to bring out another Jackal King from the deck, since Jackal's effect is not a once per turn. Now, Jackal King's monster effect allows him to negate a monster effect by removing 2 spell counters from the field. Essentially, any 1 spell used, Jackal King can turn into a live monster negate, since he himself gains 2 spell counters when a spell is activated. Master Cerberus is your Mythical Beast Rhoda. His pendulum effect allows him to pop himself to search 1 level 7 or lower Mythical Beast pendulum monster from your deck, which really just means not him, since he is level 8 for some reason. The intended combo is to search Jackal King and use his pendulum effect to summon Cerberus, which is a handy combo depending on the circumstances. His monster effects are pretty great as well. He cannot be destroyed by card effects with 4+ spell counters on the field, and can remove 4 counters to target one of your opponent's monsters and banish them. Then, he gains attack equal to the attack of the target banished. He gets around things that cannot be destroyed or have effects when they would be destroyed. The attack increase is really good as well. He can probably beat over whatever you're having issues with. Be mindful he is level 8 for some reason. Endymion, the Mighty Master of Magic. His pendulum effect sounds loaded, but once you read it the first time, it's easy to simplify. He can remove 6 spell counters from your field and special summon himself, and then destroy a number of cards up to the number of cards you control that has an effect to hold spell counters, and if you do, this card gains spell counters equal to the number of cards destroyed. His pendulum effect says number of cards you control that can have a spell counter, but that's misleading, as even if they can't hold any because of things like skill drain, they still count. Now, I want to go over some rules with this. Since it is a spell effect, skill drain and solemn strike do not stop any of this. Additionally, do you know how you activate MST and how your opponent can chain the card you're trying to destroy to MST? you don't choose what to destroy until after Endymion is summoned, which means your opponent does not know what you'll destroy and they can't chain to you choosing what to destroy, because the special summon and the destruction is all in one effect. If you noticed, there are no periods in that effect, it's all commas. Therefore, your opponent has to preemptively decide what to activate when you activate this effect if they don't want to risk some of them being lost without being used first. Lastly, Mythical Beast, while in the Pendulum Zone, does not technically have an effect to hold spell counters. Therefore, Mythical Beast in the Pendulum Zones do not count towards the amount of cards he can destroy. With that aside, this is useful for getting over floodgates like Skill Drain, Summon Limit, and Gozen Match, or just simply getting rid of your opponent's field. If your opponent don't have anything on their field, Magister and Servant in the Monster Zones are decent targets since they go back to the Pendulum Zones with the spell counters they have. Now, let's talk about his monster effect. Once per turn, he can negate a spell trap by bouncing a card you control which has a spell counter. And if you do, destroy that spell trap, and if you do that, Endymion gains spell counters equal to the number of counters that were on the card bounced. While he has at least one spell counter, he cannot be targeted or destroyed by card effects. And if he dies by battle, you can add one normal spell from your deck to your hand. Now, more rulings. If you negate a spell trap in the graveyard, since you cannot destroy cards in the graveyard, Endymion still negates, but he doesn't get the counters of the card bounced. I learned that the hard way, so there you go. His bounce is really great since it can allow you to reuse things like Servant or Magister to later use for Pendulum effects again, or reuse some of the continuous spells like Mythical Institution, or even reuse cards like Garuda to put it back into your hand. There isn't much to say about Spell Power Mastery. It's a Rhoda for the Endymion archetype. It gets more powerful after each copy that you use, since it'll give more and more spell counters after each copy. Pretty good, all I gotta say about that. Power of the Guardians is technically not an archetype spell, but it uses spell counters and its effect heavily implies it was intended for this deck. Basically, when the equipped monster attacks or is attacked, this equipped spell gains 1 counter and the monster equipped to it gains 500 attack and defense for every counter on it. Now, that's not what you care about. What you really care about is the fact that if the monster will be destroyed, you can remove 1 spell counter from your field instead. That last effect is what you really want, and the target is either Jackal King or Apollousa, because if you give it to Apollousa, it will fuel her negates since it will give her more attack. For Jackal, it's pretty good because he has no protection at all, and typically when you have like an Endymion and a Jackal, if your opponent tries to Lightning Storm or tries to Regeki, you're almost forced to negate it to save your Jackal King. Where if you tap on this with it, it doesn't really matter because then you can just remove a spell counter anywhere on the field. And the protection is not a once per turn. And the attack boost is pretty good, like I said, for Apollousa, but it also helps Jackal King get a little bit beefier to get past his, measly 2400 attack. The Magical Citadel is self-explanatory. It gains spell counters, allow cards that remove counters only from themselves to use this card instead. It can replace the spell counters, and its protection is not once per turn. Mythical Institution is your continuous Rhoda. It is a soft once per turn, so if you happen to bounce it with Reflection or Endymion, you can activate it and use its effect again. If you have 3 of these, you can activate 3 each. Its cost is you must remove spells from your field equal to the level of the monster you want to add, which is, still good. And then, like the Citadel, it has the same type of protection, but it is also not a once per turn. However, it does gain them slightly harder as it only gains them when a Mythical Beast Pendulum monster is destroyed. Odd Eye's Dissolver is like Cerberus. It's level 8 with a scale of 4, but it is also a hand trap and it has a strong monster effect. At the start of the damage step, when a Pendulum monster you control battles, you can special summon this card from your hand, and if you do, your Pendulum monster cannot be destroyed by that battle. Since it's during the damage step, that means it won't be negated 99% of the time. The real reason you use this is for his field effect. You can special summon 1 fusion monster from your extra deck using this card and other monsters you control, including the monsters in your Pendulum zones, allowing you to bring out Odd Eye's Vortex Dragon, which we will get to later. His Pendulum effect is the same, except it's hand and field only, which you probably won't ever use, though there is a niche situation, which we'll talk about later. Titan Kendo Spirit seems like an oddball because it's a level 5 warrior. What you care about is he is a high skill of 9, so he can bring out Dissolver and Cerberus. Additionally, his Pendulum effect is when you Pendulum summon, he gets added back to your hand, which means you can place him again for more spell counters. He is a superb target for Magical Abductor, since Abductor would also be in the Pendulum zone, so it's an easy 3-9 scale. Raigeki, Harpy's Feather Duster, and Dark Ruler No More are just great cards. You have a monster wipe, a back row wipe, and a one-sided spell version of Skill Drain, all searchable when Endymion dies. They're great cards that keeps the pressure on your opponent. I do plan to add additional Dark Rulers to my deck, but I haven't decided what to replace them with as I don't even have enough UR gems to craft 2 more. Astrograph Sorcerer is amazing. You don't care for his Pendulum effect or his scale. His monster effect allows him to special summon himself when a card you control is destroyed and searches a monster from your deck whose name is the same as another monster you controlled that was destroyed that turn and is in your extra deck, banish zone, or graveyard. This meshes extremely well with the Mythical Beasts, and if you search him from the extra deck by Electromite's effect, his effect can be activated. He is also level 7 and can combine with Reflection or Endymion to go into Odd Eyes Absolute, which creates a great segue to the extra deck. Odd Eyes Absolute Dragon requires 2 level 7 monsters, so it's a rank 7, and when he is sent to the graveyard, you can special summon an Odd Eyes monster from your extra deck, which is how you get Vortex. Now, how you send this to the graveyard is typically through linking, so you can either link it with 2 other monsters to go into Selene, or you can link it with Selene or 3 other monsters to go into either Access Code Talker or to go in Appaloosa. Now Vortex is pretty great. So his materials, if you were to use Dissolver, would be 1 Odd Eyes monster, which is Dissolver, plus 1 Pendulum monster, and then when he is summoned, he can target 1 attack position monster your opponent controls and bounce it, so that's pretty good. And then he has an Omni Negate at the cost of shuffling 1 Pendulum monster from your extra deck into the deck, allowing you to recycle cards like Dissolver or Kendo. He additionally has a pretty big defense of 3k. You can also slap on Power of the Guardians on him, and he will be a real trouble for your opponent to deal with. Electromite is another fantastic card for all Pendulum decks. Adds a Pendulum monster from the deck to the face of extra deck. Once per turn, you can target 1 card you control to destroy it and add a Pendulum monster from face of extra deck to your hand. Then it has an effect to draw a card when a card in your Pendulum zone leaves the field. It has synergy with the Mythical Beast self-popping. It has synergy with the Dissolver's ability to use Pendulum zones for fusions, Astrograph's summoning condition, and you can even proc it by using Endymion's Pendulum effect. You can also pop one with Electromite herself. If you're feeling feisty, you can summon Starving Venom using Dissolver's effect to use a Pendulum monster, to proc Electromite's effect to draw a card, then use Starving Venom to copy Electromite to then pop a Mythical Beast monster in the Pendulum zone to draw another card. All such good synergy that's not allowed in TCG. TCG over here breaking up families. So Pentastag is mostly there just for piercing damage. Basically, monsters that he points to gain access to piercing damage. That's about it. Triple Burst Dragon is a little more useful. It's a once per turn during the damage step. When a spell, trap, or monster fight is activated, you can negate it. That's kind of cool, it's more negates. If this card attacks a deepest position monster and inflicts piercing damage, that's the main reason I picked it. And then during your main phase, except the turn that was special summoned, you can tribute this card, then target 1 link to or lower monster in your graveyard, special summon it. Now that's useful to bring back Electromite. It does have a last effect with dragons, but since we don't run dragons, we don't really care about that. So that's why these are here. And before I forget, the reason we are running piercing damage is because there's an Xyz monster called Crooked Cook, and basically with the right materials, he is immune to card effects and he's immune to battle. So I got piercing damage to kind of beat over that if I do run into that. Selene is pretty great. She gets spell counters equal to the number of spells on the field or in the graveyard, and then she can remove as a quick effect 3 spell counters to special summon a spellcaster from your hand or graveyard. This combos well with Servant's discard effect earlier, as well as the bouncing of Endymion and Reflection. Her special summon effect also lets you go right into Access Code Talker and Appaloosa with minimal effort, and then she does have a protection effect where she cannot be selected as an attack target while an Endymion card is on the field. You typically won't really run into that because people usually aren't trying to attack her, but also probably because they can't attack her, so you know. So that's kind of cool that she's protected, and then by her being able to special summon, that means that if for some reason she's the only card on your field, then she can special summon another Endymion card, therefore she would be protected. Her combo is pretty simple. You can only control one of her. The original attack of this card is equal to 800 times the number of materials used for its link summon. Once per chain, when your opponent activates a monster effect quick effect, you can make this card lose exactly 800 attack, and if you do, negate the activation. This is basically just more negates. It's not as Unga Boonga as Access Code Talker, but it's still a really good monster to take in because it's negating. And in case you forgot, you can also equip Power of the Guardians on this to give him more attack, and then if you use like something like Jackal or Servant, you can basically feed her attacks, feeding her more negates, and it's a pretty good combo. I tried it myself, it's pretty fun. Access Code Talker is a pretty Unga Boonga card, a pretty safe Unga Boonga card. Your opponent can activate cards or effects in response to this card's effect's activation, but do know that if it's an open window, such as impermanence can't activate it in response to the effect, but after the effect goes off, it can then, as open window, target you. If this card is link summoned, you can target one link monster that was used as material for its link summon, which is typically Selene. This card gains attack equal to that monster's link rating, so 3000, making it 5300. And then you can banish one link monster from your field or graveyard, destroy one card your opponent controls. Also, for the rest of this turn, you cannot banish monsters with that same attribute to activate this effect. So that means that you are typically probably having Selene and Electromite in the graveyard. One is fire, one is light. So what you could do is you could banish Electromite, pop one, banish Selene, pop another. You could banish this card, but why would you do that? Pretty good, all I'll say. So Starving Venom, I rarely ever use this myself, but you can fusion summon it or you can special summon it by attributing the above cards you control. Once per turn, basically it can target another monster on the field or in the graveyard, and basically he will copy their name and effect, and then he will also gain piercing damage. Piercing damage is the main reason I picked him, but the effect copying can come in useful if you wanted to copy, for example, Endymion, or if you want to copy Jackal. Now I know you're probably wondering, why is the deck over 40 cards? Isn't 40 the most optimal? I'm going to say yes and no. It depends on what those extra cards you added do. If it's a mirror match, for example, the ones with 40 cards isn't automatically stronger than the one with 45. Let's take Exodia, for example. Exodia's power, right, is directly tied to its deck size, which is why all Exodia decks have 40 cards. An Exodia deck with 40 cards will always be stronger than another with 45 because they get to all 5 pieces quicker, and the pieces are actually quite difficult to search consistently. In this deck, searching is easy, and Pot of Desires actually helps decks that are over 40 because it basically takes 12 of them out of your deck. Having over 40 to me is fine as long as the added cards are adding a great benefit to the deck. Now, that leads me to talk about Upstart, right? Why do I have Upstart in a deck over 40 cards, right? Because when you use Upstart in a deck that has over 40 cards, all you do is you get the card that you would have had you had Upstart not been there, right? And all it does is give your opponent 1,000 life points, so it's pretty much worthless. However, in this deck you get spell counters, and I'm actually fine with that trade. The reason I use it instead of like Tune Tables or like Spell Power Grasp, because Spell Power Grasp would help Spell Power Mastery, right? Because Spell Power Mastery also counts the amount of Spell Power Grasp you have. But I don't use those because Tune Tables searches itself. It is Spell Power Grasp, that's the same thing, but it's a harder once per turn. Maybe I don't want Tune Tables, or maybe I don't want Spell Power Grabs. Maybe I just want whatever is next, right? If I want an Endymion, for example, I want Endymion or an Upstart that leads me to Endymion. I don't want Tune Tables or a Grasp. Which leads me next to the pots. So you have Extravagance, you have Providence, you have Desires, and then other ones that we ain't gonna talk about. Pot of Desires is the one to use. You don't want to use Extravagance, because Extravagance locks you out of drawing for the rest of the turn, which is terrible. Now I know that some people don't like Pot of Desire because you banish 10, but let me tell you that it's going to be extremely rare for you to banish all of your Jackals and all of your Endymions. Alright, like this chance is so small that you might not even ever see it in your lifetime. Right? Because it's just a really smart, especially if you have a deck like mine, which is over 40, right? The chance is even rare, and then that's why you search for Endymion and Jackal before you use it. Now, if you can't search, like let's just say, I don't know, for some reason you're unable to search for them, and you have to use Pot of Desires, right? It's still going to be super rare that you're going to banish all 3 copies of each, right? That's going to be pretty extremely rare. So that's what I got to say about the pots, the Upstart, and then having over 40 cards. As for additional tech options, you could actually put in Super Poly, and that's because you have a lot of good targets for Super Poly. You even have that big Credit Plant one that requires 3 Dark Monsters on the field. That one's pretty good because you can at least provide 2 of the materials, even if your opponent only provides 1, and it has a pretty good negate, where it can negate special summons once per turn. Pretty worth it. I don't want to go through all of them because this is already long enough, but I will flash them on the screen. As for additional tech options, on top of Super Poly, I would probably say Royal Decree and Red Reboot, one of each at most. If you don't have Red Reboot, or you don't have, like, you know, the gems, you could do 2 Royal Decrees. It is pretty good against those floodgates, especially Imperial Order, which is the one that's going to give you the most trouble. So it'll stop like Goes a Match, Skill Drain, Imperial Order. It will also stop Eldlich, even though this deck has a pretty good matchup with Eldlich, for reasons I'll explain later. So I'll probably maybe tech in those. I would not tech in things like Kaijus or Solemn Judgment or Forbidden Droplet. Forbidden Droplet actually won't work because it has to send cards to the graveyard, well, monsters to the graveyard, and not monsters, but you know what I mean. It has to send cards to the graveyard, so you're forced to use spells only because you can't send your monsters to the graveyard because they go to the extra deck. So it's not really worth it. You don't really get much benefit from it. It's probably better if you just stick to Dark Ruler no more if you are going to have one of those like AoE negates. Now, I have been asked about Curtain Raiser, and I'm going to say that for this specific deck, I would probably not run him. Here's the reason why. So his pendulum effect is, if you control no monsters, you can special summon this card from your pendulum zone. You can only use this effect once per duel. So the thing is, if you don't open with him, then his pendulum effect becomes rather useless, right? Unless you're running 3 of him, which I would do not recommend. His monster effect can't be used unless you're running Abyss script spells in your deck, which I'm pretty sure you're not. So I would not run this specifically for this deck, because he doesn't really do much for this deck. So someone recently told me that they were stuck with a hand of 2 Master Cerberuses and 3 Jackal Kings. So I'm going to tell you what board you can make with that. So for one, you place your first Cerberus in the Pendulum Zone, and then you pop it to get normal Jackal from your deck. Then you normal summon Jackal, and then you put your first Jackal King in the zone, and then you pop it to summon Cerberus. And then you link away Cerberus and normal Jackal into Electromite. Then you use the Electromite's effect to search Magister. Then you put your second Jackal King in the zone, and then Electromite will pop that Jackal King to get Magister from your extra deck, right? And then you'll draw a card. Then you put Magister in a zone, then you put your other Cerberus in the other zone. Magister would then gain 1 counter. And then you will pendulum summon all Jackals, the one that's still in your hand, and the 2 that is now in the extra deck. And then this combo, and then you will also link away one of the Jackals for Selene, right? Because you do Electromite Jackal to get Selene. This combo may or may not be different depending on what you drew. For example, if you drew Spell Power Mastery, you use it to search Endymion and give the spell counters to Magister. Then use Magister to special summon the Jackal King that you linked away. Then you set Endymion in that zone. Then you pay the cost, you summon him, and then you destroy Magister and or Cerberus at that point. Now before I move on to the final chapter about matchups, I want to talk about certain interactions and combos. The effects of Magister and Servant are not a harder once per turn, as only their special summons are a harder once per turn, which by proxy does make Reflection's monster effect a hard once per turn. This means if they get bounced, if you summon them back that same turn, you can use their monster effect again. This also extends to Endymion and Jackal King. If Endymion bounces another Endymion, and Selene summons that Endymion back, that now summoned Endymion has its negate life again. For example, I have a duel I have against a hero's deck. I almost lost because I did a huge misplay on my turn, but watch what I did with the Magister. If you didn't know you could do that, well, now you do. Master Cerberus is also another that is a soft once per turn, so you could banish 2 monsters with 1 Cerberus, assuming you have the means to summon him twice. Now, I know another question that I've been asked, or I've seen people ask before was, do I summon Endymion or Jackal first? Now, Jackal is typically the better pick because of Nibiru, but if you are ever playing Endymions, and let's say that you are not confident that you'll get both Endymion and Jackal on the field, I would go with Endymion because he has the protection. Now, I do notice that people are seemingly getting away from using Nibiru, but you can never be too safe. Now, make sure that when you're playing this deck, or any Endymion deck, make sure that you look at all of your options when you do your combos. Don't ever rush to do things, and the reason I say that is because this is a very complicated archetype, being Endymion's Mythical Beasts. So be careful and don't rush in, because then what I did with the heroes fight, I ended up messing up and then they almost came back because of it. So make sure to look at all of your options. Don't worry about, the timer and all that. Just think of all the avenues you can take and then decide which one is the best while keeping into account the board state at the end of your combo and how many counters you will have. Just a heads up. Another interaction I want to discuss is Dissolver and Absolute Dragon. So Oddeyes Absolute Dragon can be used as material for Vortex Dragon. Therefore, you could technically summon 2 of them in one turn if you use Dissolver's effect to then use Oddeyes Absolute as one of the materials, and then you summon Vortex Dragon using them as materials, and then use Absolute Dragon's Graveyard effect to summon Vortex again. So there is a niche use for his Pendulum effect for if you can summon 2 Vortexes in one turn. Now we're finally onto matchups. So here's the thing. So with Eldlich, unless Eldlich flips up Imperial Order, you will most likely be winning, assuming you get Endymion out before they can flip Imperial Order. Master Cerberus is their worst nightmare, since if they don't banish him, Cerberus can keep reappearing later to banish another Eldlich. Bouncing Eldlich to the hand sounds terrible, but it's actually a good strategy. Here is a video of me facing an Eldlich player, and I want you to focus on how many cards are each of us control. Now, another deck I've been facing a lot is the TriBrigade Zoodiac variant. Now, Endymion and Cerberus together seems to give them trouble. When they bring out their boss monster, the one that banishes, they have to pick which to banish. They can either banish Cerberus and then smash into Endymion, or banish Endymion and smash into Cerberus. If they do the former, I get a free normal spell, right? So if they were to banish Cerberus and then smash into Endymion, I get a normal spell. But then, if they instead decide to banish Endymion and smash into Cerberus, then I can resummon Cerberus later to then banish their boss monster. The Zoodiac variant is, like the Zoodiac side of it, is stopped hard by Garuda and Reflection, and therefore by proxy Magister. Here is a video I have against him actually. Now, when it comes to Zoodiacs, you do want to be careful of Zeus, right? Because Zoodiacs is known as Zeus Turbo, and they'll try to go for it. You want to be careful of that one Zoodiac that they have that can attack directly. I always found the best way to stop it is just to use Garuda or Reflection beforehand. Because once he hits the field with Zoodiacs, he typically has like 8 materials, you know, something crazy. And it's kind of hard to get that many negates where you can negate each one. So the best and most reliable way I found was to just get Reflection or have Garuda in your hand or field if you know that's what you're fighting against. It can take you by surprise, which is why I try to have Garuda in my hand, but you know, it doesn't always work out. But even if they wipe your field, as you've seen before, you can still kind of come back. Like, it's not like an end all be all. So yeah. Now, if you've seen that Eldlich match and that TriBrigade match, you will see that in both cases I had normal summoned Jackal, and then in the TriBrigade I have normal summoned Magister. That's because those two are really good normal summons. Jackal can get out Jackal King pretty quickly, which is pretty good. And then Magister's monster effect is also pretty good. Kind of for the same reason Jackal's is pretty good as well. So for that, they're both the normal summon. That's why I don't run the spellbook engine. We run 2 of the Blue Boy, 2 Spellbook of Secrets, and 2 Spellbook of Knowledge. Is because, one, if you draw Spellbook of Knowledge and not the other 2, what happens is that it becomes a brick because you can't use it on your own monsters because they're pendulum monsters. And what's going to happen is if you use Knowledge on a pendulum monster, they get sent to the extra deck, not the graveyard. Therefore, you do not draw the 2 cards that the effect will normally give. On top of that, to use Blue Boy, you need to give up your normal summon, which I would prefer it to be Jackal, and sometimes even Magister, to be fair. So that's why I don't run it, because it combats my normal summon and I want to use my normal summon for other things usually. Another good tech card is Village of the Spellcasters. It's really good against Sky Strikers for one. It's really good against any ritual decks like Drytron, right? And then it's really good against many fusion decks such as Heroes. It's also decent against Alistair only because Alistair's fusions are not Spellcasters, or at least most of them aren't. So you could find a way to keep Alistair off the field and then they won't be able to activate spells. Now, it's not that strong against things like Eldlich, decks that use a lot of traps, and in my experience it doesn't stop TriBrigades too much. It does stop them from a lot of stuff, but since they have pretty good traps too they can use, they could also themselves play around it. But you're mostly playing this so that your opponent has less options, right? Sometimes giving your opponent less options is just good enough. So I would tech this, and if you do tech this, I would probably remove 1 Citadel and then put this in. Here is my deck again, and I will go over replacements. For replacements, if you don't have Astrograph, you can live without it in the meantime. His effects are surprisingly generic, so I would still eventually craft him. I'd craft him over Access Code and Apollo. If you don't have Upstart, it's good in any other deck that you need to filter for you. It's not necessary in this deck, so you can easily drop it. There is no replacement for Desires, to be fair. Desires is a secret rare, so it'd be kind of weird to say Upstart is a replacement since Upstart is a ultra rare. Electromite, Access Code Talker, and Apollo have no replacements. However, if you have at least 2 Selines, I would prioritize crafting Electromite. You can live without Apollo and Talker, but since they are generic for any deck, I would still recommend you craft them eventually. Now, Starving Venom is also optional. As I said earlier, don't craft him if you don't already have him. He is a secret rare. And then for Feather Duster, you could replace it with Mythical Space Typhoon or Twin Twister. You can't search it with Endymion, but don't make Endymions affect our priority. They also serve as a way to get around Imperial Order, since you can chain 2 Imperial Order's activation with these. Mythical Space Typhoon is rare, while Twin Twister is a secret rare. I honestly would just go for Mythical Space Typhoon, even if you have Twin Twister, because you don't have to do the discard effect, or the discard cost. For Dark Ruler No More, there's pretty much no replacement for it. I would definitely craft 3 of these. I haven't decided what I will replace with the 2 Dark Rulers. I might get rid of the 2 Upstarts. I don't know yet. For Power of the Guardians, which is a secret rare, the closest replacement is the Spellbook of Wisdom, which is rare. and it is a quick play that allows you to make a spellcaster you control unaffected by spells or traps for the turn, allowing you to bypass skill drain for that turn, or to bypass things like Lightning Storm, for example. You could chain it to Lightning Storm, give it to Jackal, and then therefore if they try to destroy your monster, Jackal will be protected. Something I forgot to mention too as a tech option is Big Eye. He is a rank 7 spellcaster that he can detach one material to take control of one monster your opponent controls. It is a pretty good going second card, but it is a secret rare. But the cool part is you can still use that monster's effects and it can still attack. The only difference is if you use its effect, he himself can't attack for that turn, but who cares, that's a really good +1 card advantage. Now for any last minute tips, don't add any spells that will be dead a lot, like Lightning Storm, right? If you don't open with Lightning Storm, it becomes dead later on. They will brick you a lot, and so don't waste your gems on them. If your Endymion dies by battle, you typically want to choose Spell Power Mastery, right? But do what's best for the situation. Regeki and Feather Duster are spicy targets. Desires is another safe target as well as Upstart. Remember to also try to keep your board presence, right? This is important. Your extra deck is like your own personal graveyard in hand. Nothing sent there is probably staying there permanently, right? Always have a plan B because Droplet and Dark Ruler do exist, and there can always be a well-timed Regeki and Dark Hole right after that. I'm going to eventually also switch from Endymion from time to time because you can only play one deck so many times. And you know, I'm starting to want to play something else. So I will be posting some Aromas, Dark Lords, Dragon Maids, and other Endymion variants, such as Witchcrafters and Synchros, so like Archetype Magician. And I might even make guides on those. Lastly, how do you guys feel about this guide? Was it too detailed? Was it too long? I was going to boot up Master Duel, but I figured this way would be more visually appealing since I find the Master Duel UI kind of weird to use for guide videos. It takes longer this way since I had to do a lot of syncing and cuts. But what do you guys think? Do you prefer if I just looked up Master Duel, or do you prefer this visual aesthetic? If there's anything you felt I forgot to mention or didn't mention, leave it in the comments below.